Hi, this is Matt Morton, and you're listening to the Sound Architect Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Sound Architect Podcast. I am your host, Sam Hughes, and today I am joined by composer Matt Morton. Thanks for joining me today, Matt. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No worries, it's an absolute pleasure to have you. So before we dive into one of your most recent projects, I really want to know, how did you first begin your career into music composition?
Well, it really probably started with my dad's record collection. I grew up basically into a house full of music lovers, if not music players. He played a little trumpet when he was younger, but by the time I came around, he wasn't really playing music, but he sure had an amazing ear for it, and we had just tons and tons of great records.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so pretty much, the house was always full of good music. So
You can't go wrong with good music.
yeah. I think as an artist, it always starts, you become an artist the second that you fall deep enough in love with the art to want to make it yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
That was definitely the case for me. And then when I was about 9, I had an uncle who was a multi-instrumentalist and knew enough guitar to get me started. So I took some lessons with him for about 6 months, and then he told my parents that I was better than he was and that I needed a new teacher. And so, that was 1986. So I've been playing guitar since then. And then ever since then, I've been adding instruments and recording gear and techniques and, just mostly a self taught musician and
Awesome.
composer. But yeah, it's just it started from the guitar, and then you kind of start to realize, like, okay, I have control over the guitar, but the way that it's recorded has an effect on the way that it ends up sounding, and the way that it's mixed relative to what the bass player is playing and the drummer and the parts that they choose, and whether or not we're all rhythmically locked in. And then you basically start to see that circle widen, and my curiosity just can never be quenched. I'm always learning new things, and I'm probably just as big a geek on the recording and engineering side as I am on the music side.
Yeah, sure.
Basically, I was in rock bands going through, all the way through middle school and high school. And then I went off to college and started a jam band. I was a lead guitar player in a jam band for about 9 years. So we stayed together through college, and then, gave it the old college try after we graduated to see, like, none of us wanted to be stuck in traffic in our 50s and be thinking, like, what if we would have given the band a try. So
Yeah,
we gave it a
definitely.
try for 5 years, and played regionally, played all over the kind of the eastern half of the US, and we had a van and a trailer and a merch guy and a door guy and
Oh, wow.
a website and all that stuff. And it was back in the MySpace days, which is kind of funny. But we started to kind of get to that level where you start to get record deal offers and distribution offers for albums that we had already recorded. And we were kind of running into the music industry's lack of response at that point to digital piracy. So
Yeah.
their profits were going way down, but the language in their contracts was not changing very much. So they still wanted all your control, but they were paying less for it. And so, every time we would get our attorney involved to try and negotiate better deal points and stuff like that, they'd be like, you guys are too much trouble. Like, we'll just move on to some other band that doesn't understand that this is a bad contract, basically. Reading between the lines,
Yeah.
So we never made that kind of jump up to, the old school way of making it, which would have been, like signing with a major label and
Yeah.
doing that whole thing, which I'm thankful for, because looking back on it, I realized that I loved the creativity of being in a band and having those people to work off of. It's a collaborative art, just like filmmaking. But at the same time, there's a lot of hassle, and it was getting increasingly difficult to make money. I think that the music industry is kind of pulled up from that nosedive in the years that were kind of after that, which was the early 2000s. But for me, I was starting to do my first composing gigs around then. Just little 1 and 2 minute web films, mainly for clothing retailers, hospital chains,
Yeah.
stuff like that. Little short films, and actually, one of my main collaborator as a composer is Todd Douglas Miller, who directed Apollo 11 and Dinosaur 13 and The Last Steps
Yeah.
and all of these kind of bigger titles that I've done. And he and I actually went to high school together. So,
Oh, no way.
and we had a high school band. So he was the singer in my band in high school. And after high school, he went off to film school. I, hit the road as a musician. And then kind of after all the dust settled after college, he was starting to do his first films, and I was starting to do my first composing. We kind of joined forces back up, and so for about the last 20 years, we've been working together.
Oh, no way. That's awesome.
Yeah, so we did, a bunch of projects, and luckily in obscurity, and got to make all our mistakes before people were really paying attention to us, and kind of hone our craft. And in the meantime, I kind of paid the bills with guitar and bass lessons. And that was actually an amazing side gig, because I basically got paid, $40 an hour to transcribe songs on guitar, keep those skills sharp,
Yeah.
and also just learn a lot about how songs are put together, and arrangements and chord progressions. And even if a little girl wants to learn, a Taylor Swift song, or I'm a Barbie girl, or whatever, like, you can learn something from any song,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
whether or not you personally would choose to listen to it in your normal life. So, I have thousands of pages of transcribed guitar and bass and ukulele music, and I've taught a bunch of people recording and composing and stuff like that.
Yeah. And you're a pro at Barbie Girl now, right?
Yeah. I got it down. Actually, there's a whole suite of Barbie songs I wasn't aware of. There's, like Barbie in the Crystal Palace, or some, she wanted to learn them all. So,
No way.
Yeah.
You've got a full Barbie repertoire.
That's
right. In
right.
the back pocket.
That's right. But yeah, man, I mean, if you're an up and coming composer, it's a lot better than getting a job like cleaning dishes, or even working on spreadsheets somewhere. It's like, if you can get a side gig that's sort of in your profession, it's definitely a good thing. I think there's a good reason why, I think there's a stigma attached to teaching, like those who can do, those who can't teach, right?
Oh, yeah,
But you look back, it's like, oh, are you saying that about Mozart and Beethoven? Because those guys taught. Those guys were teaching the aristocracy of Vienna, and there's a reason why they did it. It's because sometimes being a composer, the paychecks
You
are,
got to pay the bills, right?
yeah. It's an unreliable way to make your money. So teaching can
Yeah.
kind of help mitigate that a little bit. So yeah, and I'd say basically, just worked, grinded for a lot of years. That what they say about the overnight success taking 10 years. In my case, it's been 15 years of teaching and composing, and building my portfolio, or my reel up, building up my studio, the gear that you need.
Yeah.
Just every time you get a paying gig, put a little bit more into some nicer preamps, or some better speakers, or this or that shiny new synth, or old synth.
Yeah.
So
That's definitely more popular these days.
yeah. So the first thing we really did that got much notice was Dinosaur 13. That got into the Sundance Film Festival. We were the opening night U.S. documentary. So they're four categories at Sundance: the U.S. doc, the U.S. narrative, and then the world versions of those two. And so they used to pick one film from each of those to be the opening night thing, and it was kind of an honor. So we got to do that in 2014. And
That's awesome.
after the screening, there was kind of a bidding war, and Lionsgate and CNN Films bought the distribution rights, theatrical and TV, respectively there. And, the film had a short theatrical run. Didn't do all that great, honestly, but
Oh, right. It's a shame.
yeah, it did really well on CNN and ended up winning an Emmy for Outstanding Science and Technology Programming in 2015.
Oh, wow.
So that really gave us a boost as a filmmaking team. And then we did a short film about Apollo 17, which was the last mission to the moon in 1972.
Right.
And that was released between CNN and Great Big Films, which is kind of their online documentary site. They typically do little 1 to 3 minute short attention span, social media type things.
Yeah.
But that was their first foray into kind of 15 to 20 minute films. We were one of a batch of I think 8 or 10 films that were released in 2016. And in our film, the average viewership for our 20-minute cut was 19 and a half minutes, which is about as good as you can hope for.
I was going to say, yeah, that's pretty good.
So, at that point, it's 2016, and the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11, historic first moon landing was coming up in 2019, and everyone knew that everybody and their brother was going to be making an Apollo themed thing for that year. So CNN, since we had already done the Apollo 17 film was called The Last Steps, and it was just like Apollo 11. It was all archival footage, no narrator, kind of music driven, and it's just kind of an experience film. We wanted you to kind of ride along in it and have that sense of feeling like you're there. And since we had already done that on a smaller scale, we kind of got the nod from CNN to do it as a feature-length film. And so that's kind of the latest project we worked on. And yeah, so I guess the big change from the Apollo 17 short to Apollo 11 was just that for the Apollo 17 short, I kind of used any instrument available to a modern composer. So I was using, any library I felt like. I was just spinning through Contact and okay, do I want to use a glass harmonica, or do I want to use a, super modern sounding drum loop, whatever, who cares, just make it cool.
Yeah.
But upon kind of, which I think the score for that really works, but going back and listening to it, on the big screen and reflecting on it a little bit more, there were moments when some of the modern sounds kind of took me out of the feeling of really being there back in the day.
Yeah.
So when we did Apollo 11, I kind of made the decision early on to only use instruments and effects that could have made those sounds in 1969 at the time of the mission.
Oh, nice.
So every instrument and sound, technically could have been made if the composer was, had enough money.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah, I used some pretty pricey stuff. I got one of the 25 reissued Moog synthesizer 3C.
Oh, damn, nice.
Modulars. So those were, at the time, so it's kind of like a recreation of a 1968 Moog 3C.
Yeah.
Which, if your listeners can picture, Keith Emerson playing with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, or maybe picture a 1920s telephone operator at a switchboard with like tons of patch cables,
Yeah.
connecting calls between
That's
different parts
basically
of
what
the
they
city.
are now.
Yeah, it's like a giant wall of electronics with a bunch of patch cords and then a keyboard sitting at the base of it. So
Yeah.
I bought that after, kind of coming at synthesis backwards chronologically. I started with a Moog Sub 37 and then moved on to Voyager XL and then to the reissued Moog, Mini Moog Model D, which was like, so we're traveling backward from, 2015 to 2010 to then the Model D was 1970, and then the 3C was 1968. They had versions of it earlier on. I did a lot of research on early days of synthesis and musique concrète and all that kind of stuff, and just geeked out and
Yeah, just had a super nerd fest.
yeah. So I didn't even use the Model D on the score because technically that was a year later. They were already prototyping it, of course, but
You were very precise.
yeah.
You're like, nope.
No. So, I also used a Binson Echo Rec 2, which was restored and modified by Soundgas Limited up in Derbyshire. And Mellotron, it was a modern, digital one, but the actual keyboard one made by Mellotron, and it, used all the old tapes or recording tapes and stuff like that. I of course had to do the score on computer because if I would have done it on reel to reel and really done it as a 1969 person without a staff of engineers like Abbey Road guys in white lab coats running around, there's no way that I could have kept up with all of the picture changes to the edit.
Yeah.
I mean, the film was changing it up until like 2 days before the Sundance deadline, so it would have been impossible. So there were certain modern compromises that I had to make as far as using a modern DAW, but the gold standard was basically, could these sounds have been made back in the day? And so I stuck as close as humanly possible to that given budget and time constraints. But also had a real Hammond A100 and a Leslie 147. I had a Maestro Rhythm King MRK1, which is 1967 drum machine. Kind of looks like, it's huge. It looks like an amp head, like a Marshall head. And also an Ace Tone Rhythm Ace FR1,
wow.
which is this, the same drum machine that like J.J. Cale used on Naturally, if you think of that. So it was kind of a mixture of old stuff, and then of course the orchestra, which has been around for hundreds of years. That was my palette for Apollo 11, and I spent a couple of years really just down in the basement. It was almost like learning all the sounds of all this old gear was kind of like the astronauts like training in the simulators. What does this spaceship do? It's literally, it almost looks like the panel, the control panel of the lunar lander.
Yeah, some of those modulars, you definitely look like a cockpit.
Yeah, yeah. But it was just the coolest project, and I had so much fun working on it.
Yeah, and it sounds like you had quite a lot of freedom in terms of like, did you have a brief, or did you get to be like, hey, look, I think I know what this needs. I'm gonna do this.
Yeah, well, the idea of only using 1969 or earlier instruments, and then choosing to feature the synth, which I kind of arrived at from just a thought experiment of thinking the Apollo program at the time was the cutting edge of science and technology, and it was really credited with fast forwarding the normal pace of technological progress by 10 or 20 years. The fact that we dumped that much money and human resources into science, it was just sort of unprecedented, and what we got back from it was huge.
Oh yeah.
We got a lot of stuff that we didn't even expect to get, um, which it begs the question, why aren't we still doing that? But but anyway, I was trying to think, like, what was there a parallel in the music technology industry? Because every time an instrument is developed, new music is created for it. Even going back to the piano. We take it for granted that the piano's been around forever, but the full name of the piano is the piano e forte. It means that it can play both loud and soft, which was not a given. With the harpsichord, you've only got one volume. So once keyboard players could add dynamic nuance to their performances, everything changed. And even Beethoven in the 1800s was pushing piano developers or instrument designers to make louder and stronger pianos, so that they could compete with the orchestra. So innovation in instruments goes way back, even to instruments that we feel like have literally not changed or have been around for hundreds of years. So the same thing was happening in the 60s with a lot of different things. A lot of the guitar pedals, the fuzz face and the univibe, and there's a lot of technology to choose from. But specifically, I picked the synthesizer because it was kind of really blowing up in 1969.
Yeah.
Wendy Carlos had just released Switched on Bach in October of '68. They had a 4 Moog modular, concert in the sculpture garden of the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in August of '69 that drew like 5,000 people. And actually, one of those four modulars that was specially designed for that performance and featured the first presets on any synthesizer. One of those 4 ended up being Keith Emerson's synth going forward. And then there were some other interesting things too, like Don Buchla, who on the West Coast was at the same time that Bob Moog on the East Coast was developing the Moog synthesizer in 63, 64. In the exact same years in San Francisco, Don Buchla was working with the San Francisco Tape Music. What was it? San Francisco Tape. I don't know if they were a society or whatever they were, but he was developing his synth over there. And so anyway, Don Buchla and Alan Perlman, who later founded ARP, those two guys actually were they worked on the space program. They were actually engineers.
Really?
Yeah, that contributed to the eventual landing on the moon. So,
that's crazy.
So there was a literal connection between the two. And then also just the fact that just like the space program gave birth to this sort of dissemination of all this amazing technology, same thing happened with the synth. Once that got into people's hands, and at first, they cost as much as a house and a car. They were incredibly expensive. But once real people, or at least rock stars, got a hold of them, they started doing all kinds of cool stuff. And it paved the way for artists in the 70s, like, Brian Eno and Tangerine Dream and Kraftwerk and all those guys. Once it got in their hands and, it started getting a little cheaper, and once the Mini Moog came out and the 2600 came out and all of those, really interesting stuff started happening. So it was kind of like, Apollo was a big bang in science and technology, and the synth was really a big bang that gave birth to all kinds of new genres that couldn't have existed before it. So it just seemed like a kind of a natural fit, but it was, in my mind, it made total sense, but in the mind of the director, even though we're buds and like we've been working forever. I don't think I probably could have pitched him this if I was just some composer off the street. Like I had to call in on all of that trust capital that I had built up with him over many years.
Trust me, man, this is gonna work.
Yeah, and then even then I had to do a lot of experimentation, and like basically I recorded via audio and video all kinds of kind of, I was almost creating my own temp for the film, trying to be like, look man, if we combine the orchestra with the synth, I think I think it really could be amazing. I was getting into some old synth stuff from the 60s and 70s and putting it up against some of our old Apollo 17 footage, just because we didn't have the Apollo 11 footage yet. And there's just something so cool about vintage synthesizer music underneath vintage space footage. Just aesthetically,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
not even getting philosophical and thinking about the literal connections between the two. But he started to see the light, and kind of with every piece of music, I was kind of winning him over to it. So it wasn't the easy route. I mean, it would have been a lot easier to just stick with like a kind of expected orchestral type of score. But I think the end result is a lot richer because we kind of took some chances that way.
Yeah, and it's kind of a luxury when you have that close connection with a director. I mean, you guys were friends, so you had that kind of leverage to be like, hey man, look, trust me, I know what I'm doing. This is going to be great.
Yep. And, the other thing too is we had the time.
Yes.
I mean, I spent a couple of years on the score. That's not typical.
That's really big luxury.
Yeah. So I had time to not even just read books or do a lot of, I didn't just research the music of the 60s. I was researching the whole space program. I mean, I was reading books about how they were solving early problems with the Saturn V, with pogoing, which is like vibration along the length of the rocket, and how like the F1 engine kept blowing up because there wasn't enough separation between all the fuel nozzles on the on the underside.
So you're like a NASA expert.
Yeah.
Like...
I mean, I went to town, man. I really did. But I think that I kind of method acted the score, I guess, in a way.
So you got into the role.
I mean, yeah. For one, I did it because I super enjoyed it, and I've always been a space nut. But at the same time, I really do think that the story has to be the source of all inspiration for the music. The more that you can key the music into the actual story, the more successful it's going to be. Because at the end of the day, yes, I'm trying to make music that's pleasing to me and that sounds good and stuff. But my number one job is to serve the story and to help tell that story through music that's locked in to it. And so I really think like just sort of every bit that I learned about the Apollo program just gave me more respect and more kind of a sense of awe of what was accomplished.
Yeah, definitely.
And I really tried to put that into the music. Literally on one side, you've got arguably the greatest achievement by humankind on a technological level, but which is also not just a human achievement. I mean, it's basically like the most significant thing on an evolutionary level that we've done since the first fish walked on land.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
That was the first time we left our native planet, and if we're still around in a couple million years, people will still remember the name of Neil Armstrong. Long after we're, forgotten, he will still be the first human, the first life form from Earth that ever walked on a foreign planet, and so there's that sense of reverence for what happened, but also there's, one thing I found when I was watching a lot of, I watched pretty much everything that I could put my hands on, documentary wise, For All Mankind, In the Shadow of the Moon, Moonwalk 1. And then, narrative wise, like, of course, like Apollo 13 was awesome. I actually bumped into Ron Howard in New York about a month and a half ago and got to talk to him about how much I respected James Horner's score for Apollo 13. I was like, man, that was so good. I knew I couldn't even like go, anywhere near in the direction that he went with his score. And he was like, oh my gosh, yeah, he was on fire that year, because he not only did he do Apollo 13 that year, but he also did the Braveheart score in the same year. I was like, man.
Oh, wow, really?
That guy was, yeah.
I forgot that was the same year.
Yeah, that guy was throwing lightning bolts that year. But anyway, so, going back and checking out all of the scores that have been done over the years by so many great composers, it was kind of a challenge to find something unique to say, in a way.
Yeah.
But one thing that I did notice is that a lot of the films feel like they take it for granted that everyone got back safe. Apollo 13, I thought, because of the nature of it, there's definitely some tension in there.
Yeah.
But, anything that covers the rest of them, you see the liftoff, and it's just like this triumphant music. And, it's almost like they're not factoring in the fact that...
Yeah, the danger and the fear.
Yeah. I mean, basically, they had a 1 in 4 chance of dying.
Yeah.
They're sitting on a 36-story... $6.5 million pound rocket that was built, Buzz Aldrin always says, is being, kind of asked like, hey, what did it feel like, sitting in that rocket getting ready to lift off? And he's like, well, it's it's a hell of a thing sitting in this huge rocket that was built by the lowest bidder,
Yeah.
It's like, not only is it explosive, but it was also built as cheaply as they could.
Cheap.
So, I really wanted to underline that sense of danger and not let you feel like, okay, it's taken for granted. Each time they're going to do a new thing, like a translunar injection or a separation and docking or a lunar orbit insertion or a powered descent, all these different things were all possibilities for them to die or, for it to not go right. And then they'd have to, figure out how to make it work. So that's what I really tried to do. And luckily, like, the reverence for the significance of the act also kind of sounds a little bit like danger at the same time too. So musically, those two ideas were kind of related, and I was able to kind of kill two birds, so to speak.
Yeah, awesome. Did you get to meet Buzz or anything?
Yeah, I met Michael first. We did a couple of Michael Collins, the command module pilot, who everyone forgets about, but
I feel bad about that. But I just about remember Buzz as well. It's awful.
Yeah. Oh, no worries. I mean, he's awesome. He's Michael and Buzz are still alive, and we did a couple of test screenings at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in D.C., right there on the National Mall, and they've got a big IMAX screen, and the first couple of reels that we got. So I haven't spoken at all about the footage that we got, but basically when we rolled into this project, we just were setting out to get fresh scans of the 16 and 35 millimeter film that everyone has known about and has made all of the Apollo films, of the last 50 years. They've all been made by these same source tapes, and then they keep getting rescanned in digitally every few years as technology kind of increases.
Yeah.
But not even midway, fairly early on in the project, we became aware through the National Archives of this treasure trove of 65 5 perf and 70 millimeter footage that NASA had kind of set aside, and nobody. It was shot for a lot of the 65 was shot for a documentary that was funded by NASA at the time of the mission that ended up being released a couple of years later, called Moonwalk 1, which not too many people are familiar with, but it's kind of a cult classic amongst space nerds and just lovers of kind of slightly odd films. I probably watched it like 30 times during the making of Apollo 11. I absolutely love it. Anyway, from what I understand, they shot for a little while using these big, Todd AO 65 5-perf cameras, and then when it got to the processing stage, they realized why not that many people shoot in that huge format, because it was a real pain in the neck and expensive and stuff like that. So they stopped filming that way after a little bit. But and then when they were making the film, I believe they cropped it down and reprinted it onto 35. And basically chopped off the wing, the sides of the shots, and lowered the resolution. And that's kind of like what everyone has been using over the last few years. But they found these originals, and so we were like, oh my God, there's like, I think 150 reels or something. Don't quote me on that. I think there might have even been more. But anyway, we got all of them, and they weren't super labeled. If you were lucky, you had a date. If you were really lucky, you might have a loose shot list. But basically, the photographers were just shooting fast and loose, just trying to get it down, and they were like, we'll sort it out later. But we got to get this stuff while it's happening. You run out of film quick.
Yeah, I can imagine them just being like, just go, 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 go.
Yeah, exactly. So we decided to test a little bit of the footage, and so we picked 2 reels, one of which was the liftoff and one was the suiting up on the morning of the launch. And we did a test screening there, and again, the look on their faces when they're suiting up actually contrasted quite a bit against 3 or 4 days before the launch. They did sort of a dress rehearsal, where they all were getting suited up and kind of going through all of the paces of what would happen on launch day. And if you watch that footage, they're all very loose, they're joking around, they're smiling, they're chilling.
Yeah.
But on the day of,
just like quiet.
Yeah, you see the weight of the world on their shoulders, and just concentration, and had to be a little fear in there too.
Oh man, I can't even imagine what you would feel like on that day.
Yeah, absolutely. So got to meet Michael Collins at one of those test screenings. Actually, the second test screening, it wasn't the one I was describing. But that one was attended by Michael Collins and his 2 daughters, and then Rick Armstrong and Mark Armstrong, who are Neil Armstrong's sons, and their families. And basically, we were looking for, and some members of NASA and NARA, which is the National Archives.
Wow, that's so cool. You must have been in your element.
Oh man, it was amazing. Yeah, getting to go into National Air and Space Museum, which Michael Collins was actually the first director of that museum. But
oh really?
Anyway, yeah, I learned that day. It was a trip waiting to go in there. And like, I'm sitting here, on the sidewalk, our cars let us out in front of the museum, and I look over at Michael, and behind him is a picture of the 3 Apollo 11 astronauts, like blown up, 10 feet tall. And I'm like, man, I'm like standing next to like a walking Wikipedia entry, But he couldn't have been nicer. But, the main reason we had them there is that we wanted to play them, the liftoff sequence, to ask them, we played them the first 20 minutes of the film, and we wanted feedback on, like, is that what it sounded like? Is that what it felt like? Is that, that kind of thing. And Michael actually said, he was like, it wasn't loud at all for us. We were 36 stories up, all closed in. We couldn't really hear how loud it was. All we felt was on the bottom of the Saturn V rocket, there's 5 rocket engines, and the 4 outside ones are static. They don't move, but
Right.
the one in the middle moves, and it's computer controlled to try and keep the rocket upright. So it's kind of like, he said, it's like trying to balance a pencil on the end of your finger. You have to make a lot of adjustments to keep the point of
Yeah, that makes
the
sense.
pencil up in the air.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
they were basically just, getting jostled around like crazy as that computer was making, tons of adjustments per second. So,
Yeah.
he couldn't speak to the rocket sound, but Rick and Mark Armstrong were on a boat, about 2 to 3 miles away from the launch pad. So they were closer than most people in the public who were watching on the beach, from 5 miles away. They were a little closer, and they had, like, I think it was a Life or Time magazine staff photographer, because they were trying to get shots of, Neil Armstrong's family watching him lift off and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
they said that they wanted our liftoff sound to be louder, because they said they've never heard anything in their whole life that was that loud, and no sound system created has ever been able to recreate it well enough. So Mark Armstrong was very, animated. He was like,
Yeah.
man, I was just like blown away by it, and I wish, can you make it louder? Can you make it louder? Meanwhile, after the screening, we were leaving, and one of the guys, either with NASA or with the National Archives, I can't remember which, took our director aside and admitted to him that it actually triggered his PTSD from being a Marine in the armed forces.
Oh my God.
So, so he was like, make it quieter. So, we kind of couldn't win already with even a small audience. But, and then I later, the film, after it got released and everything, I don't know if you're familiar with the Starmus Festival. It was begun by Stephen Hawking and Brian May of Queen and a couple of other people, but it was started basically to be a festival that acknowledged the importance of the connection between science and music and the arts.
Yeah.
So hence the star, representing like stars in the sky in science, and then the moose, being short for music. And so anyway, we were awarded, the Apollo 11 documentary was awarded the Stephen Hawking Medal for Science Communication this past summer.
Oh, wow.
So yeah,
That's pretty epic.
yeah, it was pretty cool. Our fellow award, recipients were Brian Eno and Elon Musk.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty good company. That's pretty tall cotton, as they say.
Yeah, it's pretty cool company to be in with some awards. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where I got to meet Buzz in Switzerland, and he was a trip, man. I mean, I only got. It's so funny. You can be in a room with. We were in a room, like a kind of a VIP little, cocktail hour dinner type thing with, almost all of the living Apollo astronauts. We were there with like Kip Thorne, who won a Nobel Prize for proving Einstein's hypothesis about gravitational waves that he had made 100 years ago, but,
Couldn't prove it. Yeah.
yeah, the technology didn't exist. They didn't have sensitive enough equipment to be able to sense it and prove it and measure it and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So you're in a room with all these people that are world famous and amazing, that have walked on the moon, and then Buzz Aldrin walks in, and and like everybody turns into a fanboy. It's funny. Probably not so much the Apollo astronauts, but like, rock stars like Steve Vai was there.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah. The opening night festivities they had like a 45-minute music and and video presentation where it was Hans Zimmer did a bunch of music from Inception and Da Vinci Code and whatnot, and some new compositions, and it was all synced up with this footage of the Apollo programs, some of which we supplied to Hans and Paul Franklin, who did the visual effects on Inception and Dark Knight and all that stuff. He was kind of heading that up. But so Hans had a small orchestra, and then he had Rick Wakeman from Yes on piano.
Man, this is like a dream.
Yeah.
This is like, none of this sounds real.
And he had, Steve Vai was on guitar. And Peter Gabriel was in the audience, and who gave Brian Eno his award, and like we all ended up at the hotel bar later. Like it does sound totally made up.
Yeah, it's like you get home the next day and you're like, wait a minute, did that all happen? Like,
yeah. Well, you get home and you're like, real life is not stimulating any longer.
Yeah. Now what? Now what do I do with my life?
Yeah, exactly. So that's when I met Buzz, but so he walks into this cocktail party, and one by one people are going up and introducing themselves and shaking his hand and stuff.
Yeah, and he's got a lot of character and energy for a 90-year-old, right? Like
he does, yeah. So I said, "Hi, Mr. Aldrin, my name's Matt Morton. I did the music for Apollo 11." And he's like, "What?" I was like, and then I repeated it, and he was like, "Oh, music." He's like, I'm tone deaf." And then he moved on. That was all I got. Like, all right.
That was it. That was your moment.
That was it.
Enjoy.
I'm tone deaf.
And then walks off.
Yeah. So that was pretty
amazing.
funny. Had a better conversation with Michael Collins, but yeah, that was. It was just a trip, man. I mean, we've gotten to meet so many cool people from the project, but it was really, really cool to meet the guys that actually went and did it. It's an incredible achievement, and it was like such an honor and such a humbling experience to get to put that to music. I mean,
yeah,
dream project for sure.
And like, where can we see it? How can we watch Apollo 11?
So Apollo 11 was in theaters last year. I don't know. It slowly rolled out throughout the world. So it was in the UK in IMAX for a couple of weeks, and I got to come out and intro the film at the Blue Dot Festival.
Oh, cool.
On the night of the 50th anniversary, I flew into Manchester and went up there and like watched Kraftwerk play and stuff. That was so cool. And then
nice.
And then entered the film up there. And let's see, we also played it at Sundance, London. And in a couple weeks, the Apollo 11 crew, we're gonna head to London because we're nominated for a BAFTA for Best Documentary. So
congratulations, that's amazing.
Thank you. Yeah. So we'll be in your neck of the woods here again soon. But I'm not exactly sure how it's distributed in the UK, but around the world, if it's not in theaters, it's available on video on demand all over the place, and the Blu-ray is out now.
Yeah, I'm sure it's on like Amazon Prime or something.
And there's also a 45-minute version with a little bit different footage, and basically it's meant for the giant screen theaters in science centers and museums. So it's especially good for younger kids. I mean, both versions of the film are rated G, so they're suitable for all audiences, but the shorter length, I think, is a little bit easier for younger.
Yeah, easier to absorb stuff.
Exactly. So yeah, if you can't see it on the big screen, the full version, you might be able to see the shorter version on the big screen, and then see the longer version that has definitely I recommend the longer version, but the shorter version is very good. It moves very quickly, and it's like over too quick. You're just like, oh man, I want more. But yeah,
That's a good
it's really
sign.
good, and the fact that it's playing on those big IMAX screens and those giant screens is really cool.
Yeah, I bet the IMAX screen really makes a big impact.
Yes, yes, and the music. There's a lot of low end coming out of that Moog synth and
Oh
those
yeah.
old drum machines. Like the Rhythm Ace that I used, that was the grandfather of the 808. Like that was Acetone was the first company by the guy who later founded Roland. So, and that was the first transistorized drum machine
Yeah.
in the world in 1967. So that thing's got just beautiful low end. So that coming through like a huge, theater sound system is just so fun.
Oh man, yeah, I can imagine. Like, well, I'll have to check out Apollo 11 then. It sounds pretty damn epic, I have to say.
Yeah, yeah, definitely do that.
Okay, so I only have one final question for you. If you can tell me what lies in the future for you now, what are you working on next?
Well, the same team that I've been working with for 20 years, we have a couple of projects in the works. They're going to be again because we like to work slow and be very thorough. They won't be coming out anytime soon, but that's the way that we like it. I
Yeah,
love
yeah.
doing all of the back research and
You
stuff.
need the
So
time.
yeah, yeah. So there's a project that's going to be nonfiction, and then there's also going to be a narrative scripted film in the works. So really excited about those.
Oh, awesome.
I just wrapped in the fall. I did a short boxing documentary of all things
Okay, cool.
with the director Peter Berg, who did Friday Night Lights and Lone Survivor and Mile 22 and stuff like that. And he was kind of like I guess he saw Apollo 11 and was like loved the fact that it underlined the danger that they faced.
Yeah.
And he is huge into boxing, so he saw Apollo 11 and he was like, boxers face those same dangers. And this summer, a few different boxers died after their fights
Oh
because
man.
of swelling and basically head injuries and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
So he had his people approach me, and we did a short documentary called Heavy Fury versus Schwartz, and it was about a heavyweight bout from last summer. So it was it's got a lot of the sense of danger that Apollo 11 has and stuff. So hopefully I'll be working with him again soon. And as far as short term, I literally don't have anything right now, which is really great. So I'm catching up on a few things and actually working on some tracks for myself, because it becomes increasingly hard when you turn your passion into a business. Very often you get stuck in this trap where you only do music if you're being hired for it, and that's a bad trap as an artist. You got to always make sure that you're spending time making music for yourself too.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm very happily doing that right now, as well as doing a little bit of work on I've been using my main computer right now is a 2010 Mac Pro, which is definitely showing its age. So I just got one of the new ones that just came out in December of 2019, and I'm kind of getting that set up and getting all the libraries moved over and stuff. So anyone
Nice.
who's gone through that knows that that's not a short process. So I've got plenty on my table for sure. Even though I'm not actively composing at the moment. So
Yeah, it sounds like you're a bit of a busy guy, even though, you try and play it like you've not got much on,
that's
Sounds
right.
quite a lot to me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you got to have those downtimes. I think. I think in general, everyone works a little bit too much, and
It's true. It's true.
If you don't get out there and live your life and see the outside from from time to time, then you won't have as much to draw from.
It's very true.
As an artist. So I always try to, I don't live in New York or LA. I live in Columbus, Ohio, which is definitely not a center of the entertainment industry, but it allows me to work a little bit less and a little, it's almost like the Jerry Maguire approach.
Yeah.
It's like less clients, but with, putting more heart and more energy into each project that I do. So I enjoy my breaks just as much as I enjoy my projects. So
yeah, that's fantastic, and I think that's a very amazing note to leave it on as well. And I have to say, I don't know about my listeners, but for me, it's been an amazingly educational and fascinating episode for me, definitely. And it's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thanks again.
Oh man, thanks so much. I happily talk shop and nerd for as long as you want.
Well, it's been awesome, and thanks again, Matt. And hopefully we'll